Catching criminals is no easy job.
Waiting to arrest you.
But it's even harder when the criminal is a cop turned bad.
He liked having power and authority and status and a uniform.
When the police officers who were sworn to protect us turned to rape.
She was actually meeting a monster.
Murder.
What happened in those minutes or moments or seconds where he chose to go and get a weapon?
Robbery.
He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are.
And even blackmail and poisoning. All just to get what they want. In this series, I'm enlisting the help of 3 experts.
That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
2 senior officers who've put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
He was in such a lofty position that he thought he was untouchable.
And a psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't feel remorse.
In this series, I'll be investigating why some cops put themselves on the wrong side of the law, abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes. This is a story of a police officer who apparently had every reason to be happy. But on the night before he was due to fly out for his fairy tale wedding, his wife-to-be was involved in what looked like a very unfortunate accident. It's 2:15 a.m. Driving on a lonely road near Bolton in Greater Manchester are a young couple, Claire Howarth and her fiancé Martin Alex Forshaw, known as Alex. Alex and Claire are both dedicated serving police officers with impeccable records. In a matter of hours, they are due to fly to the Caribbean to get married. This young cop had everything. A woman who loved him, a nice house, good job. He had a future. But at 2:25 a.m, everything changes. Forshaw makes a 999 call, telling the emergency services they've been involved in a devastating crash. Police officers who arrive at the scene find Claire with catastrophic head injuries, but Alex appears to be barely injured. He tells police Claire veered off the road and crashed into undergrowth at 60 miles an hour. While paramedics treat Claire, police look at the scene. They have one person severely injured and the other with barely a scratch, and no other vehicle involved. So what has happened? I'm just heading towards Harwood in Bolton, Greater Manchester, to where Claire Howarth's BMW was found crashed into a hedge. Beverly Walkden is a journalist who covered this case from the beginning.
So this is the road where the crash happened. As you can see, it's quite a long road. It's quiet.
It would have been at night as well, so it would have been really dark along this road.
Yeah.
So you can see why a crash could have happened here.
Yes. When the police arrived, the car had gone into the hedge. They could see that there was a female driver and that she was injured.
And Forshaw had phoned the police and said she just veered off the road and crashed.
Well, he said that while they were driving, she had knocked into something, hit something while she was trying to reach down for a CD, and at that point, she'd veered off the road.
What happens then is Forshaw goes off to a hospital because obviously they think, well, if he's been involved in the crash, he'll need checks, and Claire's taken as well.
Yes, yeah.
As Claire is rushed to hospital with serious head injuries, paramedics and police survey the scene. To find out more about what they would have been looking for, I'm calling in former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves, who has 30 years' experience. When you arrive at the scene of what looks like an accident, what's the first things you're looking for?
The first thing the officers would have been doing would be asking for an explanation. So Forshaw would have been asked exactly what happened, and then the officers would then try and make a quick assessment as to what he said, whether it fits what he's saying.
Well, even I can see there's very little damage to the car.
No, well, there's near enough scratch marks at best, but then there's no damage to the windscreen.
Yeah.
Because bearing in mind she had significant injuries to her head, you'd expect, if this was an accident, you'd expect to see some damage to it. When you're looking at the tyre marks, there's no tyre marks as if the vehicle is going at a significant speed and then ends up in that position.
So would then, if you think, hang on, something's happened here, would you then look at it as a crime scene?
The officers would have treated that as a crime scene straight away. Just looking at the bare facts and information that they were given. Their view would be, let's prove otherwise. So they would call in the collision reconstruction team. They would then treat this as a crime scene because her injuries would suggest that she may not have survived it. It would be cordoned off. They would have taken photographs.
But it's safe to say, as soon as they've seen this, they've gone, something else has happened.
Yeah. His explanation just did not marry up. And I would be very surprised if a police officer finds himself in that similar scenario and just say, yeah, OK, it's an accident and that's it. Forshaw would have to explain the injuries and that the position that the vehicle is in, there is something wrong here.
Something about this scene just doesn't ring true. But Alex Forshaw and his fiancée seem, on the surface, to be a happy young couple. He's due to make Claire his wife in 5 days' time. And it seems they're looking forward to a golden future. I'm calling in former Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Hill. In a 30-year policing career, she has investigated countless serious crimes. So we've got Martin Alexander Forshaw. What do we know about him?
Martin was also known by his friends as Alex. He was a young police officer in Cheshire. He joined in 2003 and he was on a response team, a uniformed cop that would respond to, everyday calls in Macclesfield in Cheshire, and he was an expert in self-defence. It will teach you how to disarm someone, how to protect yourself, how to make sure that if someone's going to attack you, that it's going to have the least impact on your body.
And he had a partner?
So when he joined the police service, he had a partner and he also had a child. And what happened, that relationship broke up. And then he met Claire Howarth. Claire was 31 years old. She was also a police officer. Claire was a really vivacious young woman who'd worked out in Ibiza, liked travelling, and she liked the high life. She was very different to Forshaw.
After just 6 months, the couple moved in together and got engaged on holiday in Mexico. They planned a dream wedding on the Caribbean island of St. Lucia. Their flight was booked for the 7th of May.
Claire was full of excitement, posting on social media, getting excited about the wedding, going to be going off, drinking wine and dancing, having a great time, and so excited to be marrying the love of her life.
May the 6th, 2009. The day before they were due to fly off seemed to start out as a happy day for the couple. Claire had been to a Manchester shopping mall to buy last-minute things for their holiday.
They were getting ready to go away the next day. She was really excited about getting married. So everything was fine. It appeared, both hard-working cops, and they're going to get married.
But less than 2 hours after posting her happiness on social media, Claire is being rushed to hospital.
They're trying to save her life. Sadly, she died later of those injuries.
A young woman, so full of life with a great future ahead of her, has now lost her life. Police are busy checking out the scene, trying to piece together what exactly has happened here.
His view was she was driving the car, traveling at about 60 miles per hour, and she then somehow veered off the road and hit the hedge. And that's why she ended up with the injuries that she had.
Experts arrive at fatal accidents and they measure everything. They measure the distance of braking, they check the car, they check the impact, and they would know immediately that she did not die from a fatal road accident.
His story doesn't tally with what they can see, which is the car in the hedge. There's no damage to the bumper at all. The airbags haven't been deployed.
Forshaw's at the hospital. The police are starting to say, well, this doesn't look right. So what do they do then?
So the police are presented with what Forshaw says is a car crash, basically. The car's veered off the road, but they're clearly not buying that. There's a female driver. She doesn't have injuries that tally with a car crash. Yeah. So, of course, they start to widen out their investigation.
So then straight away, surely, the suspect is Forshaw.
Oh, Forshaw's there. He's get taken to the hospital because he's got injuries and shock. However, you are now looking at suspicious death, and this is when the murder alarm bells are ringing and you start calling everybody out because this isn't right. And the fact he's a police officer it really is irrelevant. He is now a suspect in the case of a murder.
May 2009, and the morning PC Alex Forshaw was due to fly out to his fairy tale wedding in the Caribbean. Instead, his fiancée and fellow police officer Claire Howarth is dead. Killed, he says, after the car she was driving crashed on a country road at 60 miles an hour. Now, I don't quite buy that story, and neither did the police. I want to piece together what's really happened. With 30 years' experience leading major criminal investigations, Sue Hill can take me through the evidence. They're suspicious that this is something else going on here, isn't there?
Well, she's got, huge injuries to her head. She's bleeding profusely, blood in the passenger seat, blood in the driver's seat, no seatbelt. You'd expect the airbags to have exploded. They haven't. There's hardly any impact to the front of the vehicle. So suddenly you're thinking, how could she have those head injuries? She hasn't gone through the windscreen. How has this been caused?
For the police teams at the scene, their activity is hotting up.
At that point, they would have treated the scene as a crime scene, not a road traffic accident.
Right.
And then the collision reconstruction team would have attended later on that day, and then they would make an assessment.
Meanwhile, the focus of the investigation began to shift. Police at the scene were immediately suspicious, so they went to the couple's house. To find out what they discovered, I've come to Bury in Greater Manchester with journalist Beverly Walkden.
This is the road where the couple lived. Looks pretty ordinary, doesn't it?
So you actually reported from here when this happened?
Yes. By 9 o'clock-ish, we would have been deployed here as reporters to basically feed a live report about what was happening here. We were here when the cordon was around the property and around the whole road, actually. It was really important that we had as much information as possible.
And it turned out that the police had startling new information, which would put a whole new spin on this case. What information did the police tell you what happened in the house?
So what we knew at the time was that officers had arrived here. They had obviously entered the property. In the front lounge, they'd seen quite clearly that there was blood. They'd gone upstairs. In the spare bedroom, there was blood again, and it was obvious to them at that time that there'd been a terrible attack.
So obviously that's where they start piecing together that the accident was just something that he'd put together.
That's right, it didn't make sense.
So now investigators had discovered some kind of incident in the house, followed by a suspicious car accident a few miles away. There's no way. I mean, how can she be in the car and having an accident if there's blood in the house? It's obviously something that's happened in the house.
Something has happened at home, and whatever happened at home escalated.
Police even found blood next to the wedding dress Claire had ready for their ceremony in St. Lucia.
So there you've now got a crime scene, and that is now escalated. It's not a fatal road accident. This is a murder.
In this quiet area of Bury, a stone's throw from Manchester, they are waking up to a murder in their midst.
I think the whole of Greater Manchester was absolutely rocked to the core with what happened here on this road. The thought that a police officer could commit a crime like this sent shockwaves.
It must have been unbelievably shocking for the neighbours, because for all intents and purposes, this came out of the blue.
Yeah, absolutely. The neighbours here were shocked at that time. I remember speaking to some of them, and they said that they'd been a lovely couple, young, nothing untoward about them at all.
Yeah, I think that's what brings it home for me, is it's just any other estate that you've been on.
You know, it's a normal area, it's a family-orientated area, so the facade of this, you know, looks very quiet and peaceful, normal at that time. It wasn't.
Yeah.
There was something very, very strange going on.
With the discovery of blood at the home of Alex Forshaw and Claire Howarth, the officers at the scene of the crash begin to widen their search.
The search would have been taken place initially by those officers who had contained it to look to see if they could find a weapon.
Right.
She had an injury to her head, significant. They have to look for the weapon, because a lot of times a weapon is concealed or thrown nearby.
Howard's showing me the scene that officers were dealing with.
Normally, from my perspective, you'd look in within 50 yards of where that vehicle is. Can you find anything? If you think that there's likely to be, you can extend that cordon that you're doing. So the officers would have had a search parameter and they'd work to that. So the field would be the next place they would look, because it's obvious she had been hit with something, an object, a heavy object. So the chances are it could still be there. And they were right, because they then found it in the field nearby.
And what was it?
A lump hammer.
I just don't understand. Why, if you've committed what ended up being murder with a lump hammer, you take it to the scene where you stage an accident and then you just throw it in a field, and he's a police officer, surely he's going to know they're going to look.
But at the time, he's probably not thinking straight, is he? When you think about it. There's a lot going on in his head. There's nothing to suggest it was premeditated, yeah? It could have just been a fit of pique. And then his next thought is, I can't leave it in the vehicle, can he? Because the police officers would search that vehicle at some point and come across it. So maybe I'll just chuck it into the field. They may not be thinking about looking for it in there.
He obviously
But he, more than anyone else, should know that if they're going to treat this as a crime scene, then they're going to be looking close by. They don't just look at the vehicle and think that's it. They're going to extend that parameter depending on what they find or don't find, and that lump hammer would be found.
So he's obviously not thinking.
No, he's not. He's not thinking straight.
At this point, Forshaw seems to have forgotten his training as a police officer. It just stinks of massive panic. So now he's crashed the car, made it look like an accident.
Yeah. We didn't leave the scene. He'd obviously left her in the position in the driver's seat, slumped in the vehicle, then decided he would call the ambulance and the police.
Forshaw is arrested by his fellow police officers. He's now under investigation for the murder of the woman he was about to marry. Under questioning, Forshaw stuck to his story about the car crash until they find the hammer. Then he changes his story and claims he and Claire argued in the house and he is the victim.
He used the defence that Claire was attacking him. But when you look at her stature compared to his, and you look at the blows that he's rained down on her, and he had hardly any injuries, it really doesn't equate. There's no way that that was appropriate self-defence.
I can't get it into my head how you can hit somebody over the head with a hammer. I can't see how it's a reaction.
Well, it isn't a reaction. He didn't do it once. He did it 5 times. He hit her over the head 5 times. That's just not the red mist coming down. He knew when he hit her, struck her, the first blow, and then carried on. There was only one outcome, and that was going to be death or serious injury.
The post-mortem revealed Claire had suffered repeated blows to her head and neck. Forshaw's story was crumbling. Forshaw was using his police knowledge to make himself out to be a victim, but the evidence against him was starting to stack up. Bury in Greater Manchester is in shock after a young police constable is arrested for the murder of his fiancée the night before they were due to fly out to the Caribbean to be married. Martin Alex Forshaw was supposed to be an upstanding, honest police officer. But the story about how his fiancée had died was already falling apart. First, he said Claire Howarth had died in a car accident. But when the investigators proved that couldn't be true, he changed his story and told police he hit her with a lump hammer, but that he did it in self-defense. Police investigators and forensics teams have worked around the clock, and a clear picture is emerging of what really happened in the early hours of May the 7th, 2009. Former Chief Superintendent Sue Hill is going to take me through it. But when it comes to the night before they're going to fly over to St. Lucia to get married, what happened then?
Well, they appeared to be having a great time because Claire was posting on Facebook.
At 14 minutes past midnight, her first post is shared.
It looked as if the two of them were having a good time and celebrating before they leave the next day to fly out.
35 minutes later, at 11 minutes to 1, another Facebook post. Followed 1 minute later by an excited text message to a friend. It is the last time anyone hears from Claire. One hour and 35 minutes later, at 2:25 a.m, Alex Forshaw is ringing 999 from the scene of the car crash he has faked. So 1 minute Claire is posting on social media about how happy she is, and the next thing we know, she's lying in her car with catastrophic head injuries. Something happens, but what actually does the evidence tell us?
We know things went wrong and it looked as if he wanted to end the relationship with Claire. And apparently he says that, you know, he tried to tell her he wanted to break off with her and she attacked him. And rather than just ending it, the red mist has come down from him and then he's ended up killing her. He got hold of a hammer, which I've got a copy of the hammer here, a photograph of a similar hammer. That's it there. And he hit Claire over the head with that hammer in their spare bedroom of their semi-detached home.
I don't even think I could hit my worst enemy over the head with a hammer. You gotta know that's gonna do some serious, serious damage.
The only thing I would say from my experience, because nothing surprises me about human beings these days, but over many, many years of investigating murders, sometimes drink, drugs, crime of passion, the red mist comes down and people do things that you never expect them to do. So, but on this occasion you think, why didn't you just push her away? How disproportionate, you get a hammer and you smash someone around the head. That's more the red mist coming down. But to do that, he meant business. He was going to kill her.
I can't help but think there's more to the attack than meets the eye. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a motive. But what? I'm going to look at Forshaw's background more closely with former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves. He tells me the detectives uncovered key information about Forshaw's private life and his relationship with his ex-partner, Lisa Charles.
He was obviously still in a relationship with the mother of his son at the same time that he's seen Claire. Whether Claire knew that is debatable, but there is certainly anecdotal information to suggest that he was still in a relationship. And he was torn between the two, between wanting to get married, but wanting to have a relationship with the mother of his child. And there is where the problem arose.
So he's got problems at home and trying to live a lie,
yes, yeah.
Two lives going on, yeah. Trying to please two people.
Yeah, and that's difficult to do because some of his colleagues were aware of what was happening. So they knew. So I'd be very surprised if Claire didn't have some inkling about it. So we get to the day before they're supposed to go away to St. Lucia to get married, and she's buzzing, she's happy because she's going away to get married. She does a couple of Facebook messages, and she's basically saying, oh, I'm so happy, you know, we can't wait, we can't sleep, we're waiting to go. So up until that point, if you were just casually looking at her Facebook entry, you'd think everything's fine.
At this point, she's obviously not aware
of what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, no. Because this is what I always find shocking. 1 minute is all fine, and the next minute something horrendous happens, and that's in this case exactly that we know she's happy at 10 to 1, looking forward to going to St. Lucia to go and get married.
And then the bombshell happened. I don't want to go to St. Lucia. I don't want to get married anymore. He was obviously still in a relationship with the mother of his child.
For me, even if he was involved with someone else, the violence of the attack on poor Claire is still impossible to understand. Psychologist Serena Simmons explains the complex web of lies he was weaving to try and maintain relationships with two women.
He was leading a dual life, essentially. He was still seeing his ex-partner, who he had a child with. He'd also set up to have a holiday with her a month or two later. So he was still kind of lying to his ex-partner and kind of giving her false hope about what their future relationship might look like and feel like, while still also lying to the person that he was living with.
Rather than having a conversation and saying he wasn't feeling it and he didn't want to get married, it goes right to the point of the night before they're going to fly out to go and get married.
Yeah, you're right. He left it right up until the day before he essentially snapped.
Is that what you think happened? Do you think he just snapped?
Looking through all the evidence that we have, there's no evidence that this was overly planned in any way. So it seems to be that there's this built-up frustration with the lifestyle he's living.
You snap, you do something. He hit her over the head 5 times with this hammer. That's more than snapped. That's making sure the job's done.
So something clearly triggered him. He didn't know how to tell her he wasn't going to go through with the wedding. But in that moment between whatever triggered him and hitting her over the head with the hammer was a gap in his thinking. So he had time to go away, think about actually going and finding a weapon to use on his partner. And it's in that gap, that's the interesting thing. Why did he choose in that gap to not think about not doing this? He didn't, and that's the snapping part. That's that I'm going to go through with this, I'm going to do it anyway.
After the car crash, forensics teams scoured the house Forshaw shared with Claire Howarth and mapped all the signs of the struggle. Former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves has studied the evidence and Forshaw's claims that he acted in self-defence. He's going to take me through Claire's final gut-wrenching moments.
Well, we know he hit her at least 3 times whilst they were in the house together. They were in the spare with a hammer. They were in the spare bedroom and there were splatterings of blood that later on the police find. And he drags her downstairs when she's probably semi-conscious, puts her into the vehicle, the front passenger seat, and then drives away from the venue. His account was he was going to seek help.
But she's alive at this point.
She's alive, she's semi-conscious.
It's now around 2:15 a.m. on May 7th, 2009, and Forshaw is driving along the dark country road with his bleeding and injured wife-to-be slumped in the passenger seat beside him. He stops at the driveway of an isolated house.
He then decides he's going to take her out of the vehicle, still semi-conscious. He's trying to drag her towards the door. Can't do that because she's obviously fairly heavy, near enough lifeless. So he then just puts her down on the driveway. And then neighbours happen to hear some screaming, and somebody thought they heard somebody say, "I've always loved you." And I've told you I've always loved you.
But she's still alive?
But she's still alive at that point.
On a lonely road, with devastating head injuries sustained when her fiancé hit her with a hammer, Claire Howarth is bleeding and begging Alex Forshaw for her life. But what happens next is truly horrifying. Martin Alex Forshaw, a serving police officer with Cheshire Police, has brutally attacked his fiancée Claire Howarth with a hammer at their home in Bury. In a panic, Forshaw has tried to use his police knowledge to cover up his crime. He has put Claire, who is bleeding and semi-conscious, into her car and driven along a lonely country lane. This is the actual route he would have took on the night that he's attacked her. He would have put her in the car and then he would have drove this route.
Yeah, he didn't get far. He didn't get far in his state of panic.
I'm retracing Claire's final journey with local journalist Beverly Walkden.
It feels rather strange, actually. Obviously sat in the passenger seat now, which is where she would have been in the car on this route. And to try and think about, you know, was she conscious? Was she completely unconscious? Was she able to talk at that point? Was she in a huge amount of pain? It's just horrifying, really.
One thing is clear to me. Forshaw wasn't heading to a hospital or to get help as he later claimed. He was heading out of town.
Do you think he knew where he was going? Or do you think he just got in the car and drove? Because there's quite a lot of countryside around here. Look, you can see there's a lot of fields. What do you think?
Really, for somebody who's been trained in the police to look for people who cover their tracks, he didn't cover his tracks very well.
No. Here we are. Somewhere here, where he'd staged the crash. Wow, that journey didn't take long.
No.
5 minutes.
It's a lonely spot. On that night, it would have been very dark and very quiet. Beverly's going to fill in the missing piece of the jigsaw for me. What happened between the fake car crash here and the driveway where he stopped just minutes before with his battered and bleeding fiancée, helpless and semi-conscious in the passenger seat?
Forshaw pulled over into a house not far from where we are now. He said he was trying to seek assistance, but what we know now is that he stopped there. Apparently she wasn't at that point dead. He'd got out of the car, gone into his boot to get a hammer, and in his own words to the lawyer said that he'd hit her with the hammer to put her out of her pain.
Unbelievable. He had a choice there. He could have then phoned for help. He's outside a house. He could have gone and said, I need your phone, or...
Yeah. Or even at that point, this, Claire is, she's probably not, completely understanding what's going on, but what's coming to her mind straight away? I love you. I've always loved you. And yet he's got that hammer, and he has just essentially bludgeoned her to death.
You're supposed to love this woman. They were flying out to get married.
10 minutes later, Forshaw is calling 999 after putting Claire in the driver's seat and staging a car crash.
I just keep thinking about Claire still being alive on that driveway and begging for her life. And he could have saved her. But instead, he hits her again. Who does that?
I'm asking psychologist Serena Simmons how someone could be capable of such brutality.
He decides what he says is put her out of her pain. Basically like putting an animal down. That mindset, what's that about?
So, again, you're speaking like someone who is caring, who thinks about the repercussions of their actions, who doesn't want to see someone in pain or see someone suffering. But at that point, he was only thinking about self-preservation. And again, remembering that he's someone who can't deal with real emotion. So if she's being really emotional, he might be thinking quite quickly what the repercussions of that might be if she survives. And it's just too much to deal with. So my feeling is that he felt at that point that he had to essentially finish the job, which is a horrible way of putting that. But I think he rephrased it. He tried to soften how he worded that. He said, I wanted to put her out of her pain. But actually, I think he was trying to put himself out of pain because he couldn't deal with what she was saying.
The investigators and forensics teams have done their job, and the police have set out their case. Claire Howarth died the night before she was due to fly off for her wedding, at the hands of the man she thought loved her the most, her fiancé and fellow police officer, Alex Forshaw. On the 9th of May 2009, just 2 days after his arrest, Forshaw was charged with Claire's murder. Despite the evidence, Forshaw continues to insist that he killed his fiancée in self-defense after she attacked him when he told her the wedding was off. But former Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Hill doesn't buy this line.
They went to 5 times.
Yeah, 5 times.
That's somebody who has completely gone the other way and is definitely going to kill them.
He was out of control, totally out of control. What was that switch that triggered him to hit her 5 times? He said self-defence. Oh, come on, self-defence?
No.
Yeah, you might have hit her once, but
That's
5
enough.
times. With a hammer. 5 times with a hammer, no. No, he wanted to do her a serious injury.
But what I still don't understand is how someone who seems like a decent person could commit such a brutal killing. I'm asking psychologist Serena Simmons about how things could go so terribly wrong in such a short space of time.
There's nothing overtly criminal that he was involved in before he did this particular event. I think what we do see, though, when we look at him, is someone who's really immature, who doesn't really know how to express his feelings or communicate fully in his personal relationships. I think it's that frustration around not being able to say what he really wants. It's those qualities that have led to him doing this.
There is an element suggested by the messages she was putting on Facebook, excited, having another drink, and it was early hours of the morning, so it sounds like there's alcohol involved.
Yeah, sadly, yes, that can be a really significant contributing factor. We know that it reduces people's ability to think clearly, it reduces their ability to properly plan and foresee what's going to happen. It also kind of numbs our emotions a great deal as well.
We've all had arguments with our partners, we've all fell out, and alcohol-fueled rows, whatever you want to call it. How can it go from one thing to that?
You're right, that escalation is very, very extreme. So he had a previous partner, which was a very serious relationship because they shared a child. They were still actually seeing each other behind Claire's back.
Right, so he had two women he was with at the same time.
Yeah, I think he was essentially having an affair, and for someone of his nature who doesn't like confrontation, I think that would have been quite anxiety-inducing for him to try and keep both of those things going. He didn't want to be with her, but he couldn't communicate. Again, it's not an excuse that he couldn't communicate. It's incredibly sad that he didn't feel he could put the words together to have a conversation with her and just say, look, this isn't working. We can't stay together.
Throughout the police interviews, Forshaw remained adamant that he killed Claire in self-defence. It was now up to the courts to decide. On the 11th of May, the day they were due to be married in St. Lucia, Forshaw appears in court charged with Claire's murder. He was still claiming he was innocent. Do you think he really thought he was going to get away with it?
I think he hoped to get away with it. I don't necessarily think he knew for sure if he would, but I think he hoped that if he was upset enough, tried to hide the evidence enough, used his knowledge that he had as a police officer to try and construct a crime scene that just maybe he might be believed. But remember, again, with all respect, this is someone who's very immature in his thinking. He may have been a police officer, but for me, he did lack a certain intelligence around how to go about doing what he did.
While Forshaw waits for his trial, Claire's funeral takes place a few miles from the home they shared.
There's still many questions to be asked about exactly how and why Claire Howarth died. Questions that add to the sadness of those who today came to say goodbye for the last time.
Claire was 31 years old. She was in the middle of her policing degree. You know, everything in front of her. And I always think, you know what, all the things that her family are going to miss out on, not seeing her get married, not seeing her have children, never see what her potential could have been. And at her funeral, there were over 150 officers that turned up. Each and every one of those cops who know her would be just devastating knowing one of their officers had fallen, and by her fiancé, who was also a cop. It just makes it doubly worse.
On the 23rd of November 2009 at Manchester Crown Court, the trial of Martin Alex Forshaw for the murder of Claire Howarth began. Howard Groves tells me that on day one, Forshaw has a change of heart.
He changes his plea to guilty at that point, because he also has to think if he contested, there was always a chance that he would get an even greater sentence.
Right, so he's thinking there's far too much evidence here against me.
So the view is you then plead at that point, and the judge will take that into consideration that you've pleaded guilty.
So if I plead guilty to murder and it's obvious that I've done it, all the evidence is against me, I will get a shorter sentence?
Yeah, that's taken into account.
Right, and you think that's obviously why he did it?
Yeah. Because once the weight of evidence is put before him, there can be no other view taken than he committed this murder.
In court, Forshaw's lawyers said he was torn between two women, his fiancée Claire and his ex-partner Lisa Charles, and he lost control. But psychologist Serena Simmons is sceptical.
That's what he's saying now. And maybe in some ways that makes him look like the good guy. Like he told her and she just wouldn't take no for an answer. So he's trying to find excuses for his behaviour. I have no reason to believe what he tells us, given how he's behaved. I do believe, though, maybe that he was torn. We can see that he was torn because he was maintaining the life that he had with Claire while still lying to his ex-partner.
So eventually, having said, oh, it was self-defence, he then pleaded guilty to murder.
Yeah, he maintained his innocence for as long as he possibly could in light of the evidence that was shown, but eventually he did actually confess to what he'd done. And there's also some suggestion that maybe he was just trying to avoid his ex-partner from having to go and testify, and so he was trying to spare her the upset of having to do that.
So maybe in his mind all along, he cared a lot more for his ex-partner and her feelings than the person he's just murdered.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad for Claire because she's the one that paid the price for this in the end.
Martin Forshaw seems someone any mother would want for their daughter. He too was a police officer. Yet today Claire's mother saw him jailed for a minimum of 18 years. Claire was her only child.
Claire has left a great void in all of our lives. Our family and her friends were so proud of all she achieved. We will never forget her.
18 years. It just doesn't seem long enough to me.
On the facts presented, life with a minimum of 18 years is, in the views of the courts, a correct decision to make.
Yeah, it's just sad because I think if that was my daughter or my mum or my sister, she doesn't get a chance to live.
I think 99.9% of us would agree with that. But it's part of the judicial system, and we have to work within the confines of that.
He just took it upon himself to take her life. They worked together. They've known each other. They loved each other. They were going to go and get married. And yet in that moment, he hit her and hit her and hit her and then hit her again and one more. And you kind of think, you could have walked away. You still had a chance. You could have called an ambulance. But even when she was dying, he still didn't pick up the phone. He was still trying to save himself. I'm going to get out of this, and then stage the accident. It just shows how very evil he really is.
Sometimes these cases just get under your skin, and this one has with me. Claire lost her life because her fiancé couldn't find the courage to tell her the truth.
I still can't get my head around Claire Howarth's brutal murder and Forshaw's pathetic attempt to cover it up. You know, the judge was right. He was a coward. And Claire, well, she paid the ultimate price.